Koike, and this is the Lot of Sports Talk podcast. Thank you so very much for joining us on our podcast as well as our live stream on our social media platforms. No matter the teams, no matter the year, one of the highlights of March Madness, the NCAA tournament on the men's and women's side, are the upsets. Of course, on the men's side, the storyline coming in was Gonzaga's pursuit of perfection, and coming out of the tournament was their pursuit being wrecked by a steam train known as the Baylor Bears in the national championship game, Baylor winning the national championship on the men's side. But a couple of teams that upset big teams were a couple of the highlights of the NCAA tournament in 2021 on the men's side. The Abilene Christian Wildcats of the Southland Conference, a 14 seed, defeating Big Brother, the University of Texas, in the first round. A couple of free throws with 1.2 seconds to go, lifting Abilene Christian to a 1-point win. And then Oral Roberts, 15 seed, the second 15 seed ever to make the Sweet 16 after they defeated Ohio State in the second round, a come-from-behind victory against the Florida Gators. And those games for Oral Roberts and Abilene Christian will go down in history for their schools. It'll also go down in broadcasting history. Why? The first woman ever to do play-by-play of the NCAA men's basketball tournament was behind the mic for the Abilene Christian win and the Oral Roberts win in the second round, heading to the Sweet 16. She joins us on the Lot of Sports Talk podcast. Lisa Byington of the Big Ten Network, as well as CBS and Turner Sports, for the NCAA tournament that just passed last month. And first of all, Lisa, thank you so very much for joining us. Please tell me, how many messages have you had to answer and delete in the past month?
But certainly, actually, in the upper echelons of a few hundred, I would say, and it's been wonderful to see the impact and see how many people pay attention to it. To be able to get the experience of calling the NCAA tournament, I always say it was like calling my Super Bowl, because the NCAA tournament has always been exactly that for me ever since I was a little kid and watching it for the first time when I was 7 years old or 8 years old.
This past Monday, One Shining Moment was played, the video montage that puts a bow on the NCAA tournament each year, on the men's NCAA tournament on CBS. Your voice appeared twice on One Shining Moment, at least twice as far as I can remember. When you heard your voice during One Shining Moment, you felt what? I don't think you'll be the only person to shed a tear after telling that story about hearing it first in 1987 when it first ran. It's such a wonderful story that I can forgive you for mentioning the 1987 national championship game, as I am a Syracuse grad. And remembered that game well also. But I can forgive you. It's a wonderful, wonderful moment. Indiana deserved it. As well. Oh, please. Trust me, the rest of this interview will be me trying my best to hold back tears as I try to deliver these questions to you. After the second round victory that you did for Oral Roberts against the University of Florida, a wonderful game, a comeback victory by the Golden Eagles, at the very end of the game, the buzzer sounded and you said the upset makers, after beating Ohio State, the upset makers are history makers. How much did you think then, or even now, how much history you made with your call and your calls in the NCAA tournament this year?
Well, you don't think about that stuff as you're doing it. As you're working the game and as you're calling the game, that's what you're doing. I call dozens and dozens, and not even hundreds if you go back to the last few years of basketball games. So when I make that call, I'm just doing my job. Whether that's a call that you make in the NCAA tournament that it ends up making it on one-time moment, or whether that's a call of a non-conference game that you're calling in November. You put in the same amount of time and effort, and you hope that it materializes into a job well done. And so I just say, like, you can't think about the history piece. I've maybe a little bit more time to think about it now that it's in the rear view mirror. But from the moment that it was announced to actually prepping and doing the job, you can't focus on that. You focus on it's a basketball game. And I joke that it was probably fitting that this tournament took place in the state of Indiana because I had to have my own kind of Hoosier movie moment with Gene Hackman when he's measuring, right, the basket, and it's 10 feet up, and it's 15 feet to the free throw line. And so I had to have that sort of those moments that this is a sport, this is a job that I do so many days out of the year. And I'm happy that this is progress at it because that's exactly what it is. And I'm not the only one to be a part of the story. There's so many people in the past, the present, and in the future who will benefit from some of these decisions that we made in this NCAA tournament.
Once again, Lisa Byington of the Big Ten Network, as well as contributing to CBS and Turner Sports coverage of the NCAA tournament, joining us as Fox Sports as well. Of course, you've done coverage and play-by-play of the FIFA Women's World Cup and women's soccer matches as well. You mentioned the prepping for the games in Indianapolis, in the bubble, if you will, in Indianapolis. I know there were other games in West Lafayette and Bloomington. You worked for CBS and Turner for past NCAA tournaments, but you were but you were on the sideline for a couple of those years. When did you get your first inkling as to possibly knowing or thinking that you might be behind the microphone for play-by-play for this year?
The conversations began with Turner and CBS and the NCAA. It really started ramping up in January, and I think it was around the end of January, beginning of February, where the idea of, because there would be so many games, the format would be so different this year, the idea to expand the broadcast teams from 8 broadcast teams to 10 broadcast teams. It was a conversation that probably, it didn't get to minors until the end of January, beginning of February. And it was because they were extending it out to that, where they were looking for a couple other play-by-plays and a couple other analysts, that's when I first started hearing the conversation of it. And of course, when it comes to me, you're immediately saying yes, And what I liked about the conversation with it is, number one, Turner and CBS didn't offer it with the history piece in mind. They offered it to me as a broadcaster, not as a female broadcaster, but as a play-by-play. And so I appreciated that there was no mention of the history piece. In fact, Harold Bryant of CBS was doing a couple media interviews, and he had even admitted, I guess it was a question that was posed to him, I think by Richard Deitch of The Athletic, and he was asking, is Lisa Byington the first female to be a play-by-play for the NCAA tournament? And Harold hadn't given it any thought. So he had to go back to the research department just to make sure, just to fact check. And so I just appreciated that they watched my work throughout the years as a play-by-play and nothing more and nothing less. And so that's what I appreciated when the offer came to me from both those networks, CBS and Turner.
You're at the game, the first game that you're doing for the NCAA tournament. I believe it was Hartford and Baylor. Of course, Baylor of course, now the new national champions in men's basketball. You've done the FIFA Women's World Cup, some big games there. You've done Big Ten football. We know how football mad the Midwest is, and everybody's tuning in to BTN to catch some of the best teams in the country and in the Midwest. What were the nerves like for that first game, going into that first game that you're doing, compared to the other games that you've done, Women's World Cup, Big Ten Network football? What were the nerves like right before that first game where you're behind the mic with Steve Smith?
Different kind of. It wasn't necessarily just nerves. I think it was appreciation of the moment. And so I always have nerves, whether I call, as you mentioned, like a Big Ten football game. I've done stuff with Chicago Bulls or World Cup. I always get nerves, and I'll never forget this. My mom told me when I was a little kid, Lisa, that's good because, and I hope that never stops because that shows that it means something to you. So, regardless if 20 people are watching or 20 million people are watching, I get nerves whenever I put on the headset and holding the microphone. The difference with this, based on the other experiences that you talked about, is again, it was just an appreciation of the moment, and not because of the history piece, but because this was my favorite event, and to get the opportunity to throw the headset on, to sit there and to wait for that ball being tipped as part of my experience, sitting in that play-by-play chair. That to me was different and more significant in terms of just I always feel nerves, I always get butterflies, but appreciating everything that was happening and the opportunity that I had to call my all-time favorite event. That was special to feel that along with these nerves.
Once again, Lisa Byington of the Big Ten Network, Fox Sports, joining us right now. And again, fresh offer coverage of the NCAA men's basketball tournament. I believe you had just done a softball game as well. There's no rest for the weary, huh?
No, it's spring sports, man. We've got spring softball. I've had a couple spring football games coming up here as well. So, yeah, actually today was the first time that I had been back on the air since that Oral Roberts upset over Florida. I had turned a couple of assignments down just because I needed some time to just rest and recharge, and I'm glad I did because that Oral Roberts Florida game was Sunday night.
Yeah.
I drove back from Indianapolis to Chicago on Monday, and I basically slept the whole day, and I didn't really even realize that I needed it. Sometimes your body it goes on adrenaline and momentum, and then when everything slows down and shuts down, I just needed that time to sort of recharge. But back in the swing of things in spring sports.
You did the broadcast of these games. It was a dream come true. From the time you recorded One Shining Moment in the Indiana-Syracuse game to working in local media and now working national, there were, I am sure, a lot of people who supported you from that first moment to now. Of the people who did reach out to you and offered their congratulations to you, not just because you were the first female broadcaster, but you got to live out your dream, broadcasting the NCAA tournament as a play-by-play broadcaster. Of all the people who've supported you through the years, were there any people who did reach out to you after those games that you did that really, really touched you in terms of the heartfelt gratitude and congratulations that they offered to you? Anybody specific that kind of comes to mind in terms of the people who congratulated you?
The stories that I like to tell are the ones of the moms and the dads who talk about their kids, and those are the stories that I love to hear. Is my son watched you and realized that wow, there's a woman doing NCAA men's tournament basketball game. Same reaction with their daughters, because that's equally as part of the story and is an important piece to the story. It's not just the little girls, but both the little boys who are watching, and you hope that this becomes the norm for them. So I had broadcasters, probably some well-known broadcasters reach out, and that meant a lot. I've had producers, people in the business reach out. The colleagues and the coworkers that you work with and who have worked with you on a forget that sometimes they're coaches, but they're also fans of the sport as well. And so those meant a lot. So all across the board, I don't want to single out one in particular person or not, because I appreciated everyone who reached out and in a good meaning, just appreciated it in so many different ways, and because they were in so many different roles and watching it with different eyes. So it was kind of cool to see.
You know, I think the one thing that really stood out was when you mentioned the parents who reached out to you and said, "Oh, their son was able to see you do play-by-play in the NCAA tournament," and it gets to a point where that isn't foreign to people growing up, hearing women as an authoritative play-by-play voice or just in authority of a men's sport. That's not going to be foreign for that child and those children. There are people who still believe that it's not believe, but think that hearing an authoritative voice, woman's voice, is foreign in a men's sport. They're out there. I'm going to assume that those numbers are dwindling compared to what it was a number of years ago. What do you probably don't even address them, probably, but if there are people who are listening who think that a woman's voice of authority in a men's sport, like play-by-play or even color commentary as well, is foreign, what would you say to them?
Well, I would just ask, do you listen with the same ears? If you hear my voice doing a women's basketball game, and then you hear my voice doing a men's basketball game, do you hear it with the same ears? And if you don't have an issue with me being a play-by-play on a women's basketball game, then why do you have an issue with me being a play-by-play on a men's basketball game? And you said it. I mean, you said that your voice can be foreign to others, and I've used this phrase many many times. That my hope is that a woman's voice becomes background noise on a football game or a men's basketball game or a men's soccer game or a baseball game. Any sort of quote unquote men's sport. When we get to the point in time where a woman's voice is just background noise, and what I mean by that is that we have the game on in the background and we're not thinking twice about who the announcers are, then we know that we've arrived. And there will always be naysayers. There is never, no one ever signs off 100% in approval rating, right?
Yep.
So whether we get to the point that a woman's voice is background noise, whether that's 5 years down the line or 10 years down the line, I'm not sure when it's going to happen. It'll happen because there are more opportunities now for a ton of talented women to get into areas as a lead commentator for some of the sports that we've never think about before. We'll never get to 100% proof rate. But to those people, I'll just ask, ask them to look at themselves. Why do you feel that way? And if, again, if you don't have a problem with me doing a volleyball game versus a football game, ask yourself why. And I'll be interested to hear the answers.
Lisa Byington joining us on the A Lot of Sports Talk podcast, and you have done so many games, it's to the point where one may lose track of all the different games that you've done over the years, as someone who has done play-by-play as well and knows exactly the feeling that you get when you pour so much into play-by-play and just need to decompress. You mentioned not you mentioned, but you have done a lot of the women's games for Big Ten Network, women's basketball games, as well as other sports. But since we're concentrating on the NCAA tournament, you were, for the most part, up close and personal with so many of those teams in the Big Ten. Maryland, the women's basketball team, scoring for fun, 90 points per game plus, 7 teams making the NCAA tournament from the Big Ten. And women's basketball, Indiana getting this close to the Final Four before losing to a wonderful Arizona team who itself was this close to winning it all. A two-part question. What was it like covering some of the wonderful teams in the Big Ten? I didn't even mention Iowa with Caitlin Clark being so amazing as a freshman. What was it like covering the Big Ten women this year, having a wonderful, wonderful season as a whole in the conference with 7 teams in the tournament? And then your snapshot of what you thought about the women's NCAA tournament in the Final Four, where Stanford and Arizona had a classic with Stanford winning.
Well, I think with the success, first of all, start there. I think with the success
Yes.
college basketball. Am I right? I mean,
Absolutely.
some of the best teams are, and some of the best games are happening while we're all sleeping on the East Coast or the Midwest, and all that. So kudos first and foremost. I know you asked me about the Big Ten, but kudos first and foremost to the Pac-12 conference and just the showing that they had in both tournaments. It was really impressive to watch. I love the fact, I guess I'll go backwards with your question.
No
We
problem.
started off with the national championship game, and it was amazing to me that Tara Vanderveer hadn't won a national championship in so many years. And I actually grew up as a little girl. There wasn't a whole lot of women's basketball on TV, and that's why I say I grew up watching the men's NCAA
Hmm.
tournament because there were more games on when I was growing up than on the women's side. But I will say this: when I was growing up, I wanted to go to Stanford and play at Stanford because I remember Jennifer Azzi being the point guard for Tara Vanderveer, and I just loved everything that Stanford stood for, was as a school, was as a basketball program. And so it was neat for me to see after so many years that Stanford finally got one again, for Vanderveer in a year that she surpassed Pat Summitt and the all-time wins tally had a milestone year as well. Um, I mean, Adia Barnes, that story, as a mom, she's breastfeeding at halftime of the national championship game, and I'm, and I loved. So ESPN's Holly Rowe did that report, and I loved her report because she said this is way too much information that we need to start normalizing this. We're starting to talk about normalizing female voice on a men's game. Let's normalize working mothers as well. So you have, the Tara Vanderveer story, but you also have the Adia Barnes story, and the fact that they moved some mountains this year too. You have two black women in Dawn Staley and Adia Barnes pitching in the Final Four for the first time. So that in itself, just as the Final Four, quick thoughts about that is those are some of my favorite storylines. The Big Ten as a whole, I would have loved to have seen a Big Ten team, either Maryland or Indiana. Those two teams I think were two of the favorites to get to the Final Four, and that would have been easy. But the year that the Big Ten had, you just have to applaud it, and they are definitely on the upswing as well. I really was bummed that 2020 didn't have an NCAA tournament because I think the Big Ten would have fared well in that NCAA tournament as well. And for whatever reason, Addie, the Big Ten doesn't get the seeding that I think that they deserve. And in the women's game, if you don't get the seeding, that's really, really important because if you're not a top 16 seed, you're going to be on the road playing in someone else's gym. And it's hard to get the upsets when you're playing in someone else's gym. And so, what I appreciated about this year's women's basketball tournament is the seeding was there, but the seeding wasn't as important as it has been in the Big Ten in years past because it was on neutral sites. And so I think the Big Ten conference is able to prove to people that if you eliminate sort of the tipping the scales and playing at these home courts and you play with a more even playing field, we're good basketball teams, and we're a good basketball conference. And there was no other conference that was a better scoring conference this year. You mentioned Caitlin Clark and the job that she did. Um, More people saw Iowa and Caitlin Clark play because of the NCAA tournament, which is what I appreciate. More people got to see Maryland and Indiana play, Michigan play, because of the NCAA tournament. And so hopefully that momentum that they've garnered, that they shouldered, that they carried in the postseason, hopefully that will carry on again for next year as well.
You made such a wonderful point about the neutral site aspect of the women's basketball tournament. Of course, it had to happen because of COVID and the protocols and restrictions. But Iowa was not a 5 seed, I believe. Michigan was a 5 seed in the NCAA tournament. So if it was the way it usually is in the NCAA women's basketball tournament, those teams would have had to play road games in the second round, assuming that the 4 seed would win in the first round. So
Had to go to Knoxville. They would have had to go to Lexington. Michigan and Iowa would have, and those aren't easy places to win at. And so maybe they don't get to the Sweet 16 if they have to play in these places. They have to play at Kentucky and at Tennessee.
Yeah. Speaking of that SEC theme with Tennessee and Kentucky, even a team like Arkansas, who was a number 4 seed, lost to Wright State in the NCAA tournament, and that was a neutral site. But what would have happened if that game was at Bud Walton Arena instead of a neutral site? And I do want to make sure to give you the props for reminding me that it was Wright State that beat Arkansas the first time around, okay, instead of me just acting like I just knew that off the top of my head, which I thought I did, but needed you to throw me a lifeline, so I acknowledge that. Lisa, thank you so very much for joining us. The last thing I'm going to take from what you mentioned in your last question, you are advocating for being an insomniac, staying up for watching Pac-12 games. All right, absolutely advocating. Please stay up, pots of coffee. All right, so we are definitely well versed with coast to coast basketball. Lisa, we were probably separated at birth talking about recording songs and games from the TV speaker. All right, because I did the same thing, watching Stanford win in '92, watching Dawn Staley play for Virginia as well. So it is possible that as you were doing that where you were, I was doing the same thing here in New York, and it's such a pleasure to get a chance to talk with just one of the best in the business, Lisa Byington of Big Ten Network, Fox Sports, and contributing to CBS and Turner's coverage of the NCAA men's basketball tournament for the past few years. Lisa, thank you so very much for joining us, and I'm surprised that we went through all of this without having to duke it out, Medill versus Newhouse style in terms of our broadcast journalism and schools known for broadcast journalism and our alma mater. So I'm glad that that didn't have to come to pass. All right, it wouldn't have. Lisa, thank you. Yep.
Tie at the top, right?
Oh.
Say we both tie at the top.
And diplomatic as well. Like, you got everything covered. All right, so diplomatic with the answer. But Lisa, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your unbelievably busy schedule to talk with us on the Lot of Sports Talk podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for the work that you have done over the years, and we cannot wait to see the work that you will do going forward. It is a pleasure, and thank you so much for joining us.